All systems go. Clear for liftoff.
What is going on, golf fans? It's your boy, GS Luke, here with our Round 2 live stream for the Mexico Open. Going to make sure you guys are ready for all of your exposure. But first off, a look at the weather. We'll go through some strategy heading into Friday, as well as some shots gained metrics, what to look for on the stone over there on the SHIPIT Nation site, as well as contest selection and lineup construction to go out there and have yourself a day. But wherever you're at, hopefully you're having a fantastic Thursday. As we already have Nick, Chris down there in the live chat. Hopefully the day is treating you guys nicely. You're ready to talk some golf over there for tomorrow. But to go ahead and kick this thing off, we're going to take a look at some of the stat averages that we had from round one, where in the morning wave, it played about a shot harder than the afternoon, which is definitely atypical for what we see out here on tour. Usually the morning wave is the side that we want to play over there in Showdown. In general, that's when conditions tend to be a little bit more receptive, and in general, also a little bit calmer. Now, the first half of that equation, maybe not so much the case today, but when we take a look at the weather forecast, the afternoon was a little bit more blustery. You can see this is the observed weather up here at the top. In the morning, it was sub 3 miles an hour for pretty much the entire round, whereas in the afternoon, the wind kicked up, yet inexplicably, right, this is where it gets a little bit weird, it played a shot easier when the winds kicked up. So that tells us that the temperature going from what was about the 70s to start the day, closer to like the 80s, 90s by the afternoon. Closer to 60s in the morning. I was looking at the wrong forecast there. 60s in the morning, 80s in the afternoon made a pretty big difference when it came to that scoring average. So when we hop over to the weather over here on Friday and we see that same kind of effect in the mornings, a little bit cooler than what you're going to see in the afternoon, even without a huge weather split, the PM might be the side that plays easier again. Now, when we take a look at these forecasts and get a little bit more specific about it, bring up all the models at the same time, I think if you're one of the later morning guys, you're going to have the same kind of conditions as the afternoon, because the reason I say that is your later starters out there for tomorrow are going to be going off, and I mean the later starters in the morning wave, are going to be teeing off around 9 local time, which going back over there to the forecast, it looks like it's warming up right around 9 local time. So some of the forecasts have it in the mid 60s, maybe higher 60s to go out there and start the day. But by the time we get to 9:30 local time, it's within 5 degrees of its apex temperature. And by the time we get to 10, right, so just a half an hour to an hour later, you're talking about it there in the mid 80s when it comes to that temperature. So I would say that the tee time wave probably does go towards the advantage later on, right? An entire stroke advantage is nothing to go out there and scoff about. But when we take a look at some of the top scores from today, you had plenty of morning starters in there. You had your Harry Halls that were one of the first few guys out, but also your Jeremy Paul that was one of the later guys out there from the AM wave. You also had Brian Campbell, who was one of the last guys off out there during the AM wave. Plenty of PM guys that were mixing in like a Jaeger, Potgieter having a really good round right now, Fishburne, etc., all out there from the PM side. But you also have some of these AM guys mixed in. And what I really noticed, like a William Mao was one of your later AM wave players, is that the guys that started close to 9 a.m. local time look to also have those nutted conditions. So in the afternoon, just to circle in on some of these forecasts, like the GFS is one of the ones I trust a little bit more. It looks pretty much like a carbon copy of what we had for today. So that stroke advantage that you had between morning and afternoon, it might not be quite a stroke again. That's a pretty drastic change out there from one side versus the other. But I would expect some sort of advantage out there towards the later starters, which is just something that we don't usually see. And even at this golf course, I can remember out there the last 2-3 years at the morning wave played a little bit easier most of the time. So definitely a little bit surprising to see that same kind of dynamic. But the reason why I'm going to just go with what we saw there in round number one is the forecast isn't going to change at all, right? If we were talking about it going from a calm day to a little bit of a windier day, right, there might be a discussion to go out there and try and stack the AM wave. But I think after you got a whole shot advantage, once again, if it was like a half a stroke, maybe it's a different discussion, but an entire stroke difference is something that you have to account for. So personally, in my exposure, I'm probably going to have closer to 60, maybe even 65% players in the PM wave, with a lot of my AM wave exposure coming in that last maybe hour of tee times in the morning. So just to show you guys that your last tee times there in the morning wave would be there at 9:20 local time. They're over there in the central time zone over there for this event. So that'd be like a Jesper Svensson in your last group off. Also a De Solar and De La Fuente. And a few guys that kind of stick out, like a Thorbjorn Olesen. He'll be there in that like high 7K, lower end of the 8K range. I'm not exactly sure on his pricing. Jackson Suber hitting the ball well. Jose Luis Ballester Barrio. We mentioned him on my live stream a few days ago on my channel. A lot of guys that are usable, I'd say, over there from the showdown perspective. So make sure that you're staying on top of the weather. If you guys are waking up over there before lock, you might want to take a look over here on windy.com to make sure that nothing has changed drastically. But at least based on what we've seen out there so far today, and look at this, it's only growing with some of the live scoring that we have out there. Now it's over a stroke difference that we had from the morning to the afternoon. So, and just to reiterate that fact, that was even with the winds kicking up out there in round number 1. So that's why I think there could be that advantage for round number 2. Outside of the weather, we want to make sure we're targeting a solid player pool and a few different ways that we can go about that. Now, the first thing I'll mention is over there with the stone on the SHIPIT Nation site and taking a look at what they do out there for round number 2. Now, this is the main slate stone, but it should give you a pretty good feel for all the different data points that they're giving you on this stone to make your process expedited. The whole idea out there with them giving you the data in this format is so that it doesn't take you 5 hours to find all these different things. They put everything together, they aggregate all that data that you need to go out there and incorporate it into your process. So with the main slate stone, it does look a little bit different than what you have out there for round 2, but things like that round 2 historical would be things that I'd be trying to incorporate. And then bad rounds regression. If you're looking for players that maybe spun their wheels or maybe even struggled out there today and you want them at low ownership in round 2 showdown, you might want to look for that bad round regression category to try and find some guys that are maybe Bs or better out there with that kind of rating to use in that kind of format. So bad round regression, that round 2 historical, they'll have the shots gained metrics this week. We have them out there for every single player. So you're going to have the approach series and the putting series to go with as well. So all of that extremely valuable over there in the stone. And we can use the regular old shots gained metrics. So let me go ahead, refresh this. By the way, now is the time for any of those specific player questions. After we go through some shots gained metrics, any of those questions that you may have, we're going to go through some contest selection. So we'll talk through the strategy involved with that, some of the better contests that you can go out there and enter, as well as a little bit of a lineup construction out there as well. But let's catch up and see what's going on down there with the live crew. So we had Nick down there before, who, by the way, yeah, Ventura absolutely smashing. Luckily, have him out there in my pool, so I like to see that. Valimaki doing just enough to screw us both. Yeah, Nick, that's usually how it works out, right? So that was a fun one to sweat today with you, Nick. So it was a lot of fun, at least, to track that. What's going on, Michael? Let's go, Big Luke. Show us the way to the bank, attempting to do so here. And welcome on in, Go Cullet. I am having a good evening. Hopefully, you are out there yourself. But it looks like we don't have any specific players to go over, which is totally fine. If you have any, we can throw them down there. But what I mostly want to focus on here are the shots gained metrics that we have so far. Now, a few players that are still finishing up their rounds, but this is more so the process that you guys can go through, right? This isn't so much to point out specific plays. This is what I'm looking for out there in my player pool. So and you're going to look towards the top of the approach list. That's usually people's first stop when they come over here to the live shots gained metrics. And I think it's a good place to start, but it isn't the end all be all. What we're looking for are guys with sustainable approach numbers. But as we've gone a little bit more, I don't know the right word for it, maybe more informed out there as a showdown industry, you've had a lot more people looking at these approach stats. In the past, you've had sites that go out there, just run their main slate projections and dish them out there for round 2 through 4 showdown. As people have gone a little bit better at playing DFS and playing round 2 through 4 showdown, they started to look for some of these ball striking poppers. So I still think that they grade out well. I want to go out there and play them in lineups, but know that this top 5, maybe even top 10 out there on approach is is going to get a slight bump in the ownership. In fact, I run my own site, my own projections, as I'm sure a lot of you guys know. It's something that I've started to incorporate into my own process. I know that people are going to take a look at the same kind of stats that we are, and that these players might be artificially a little bit higher owned than you might expect. So, Batia, I think he's going to be the spend up play for a lot of people there with his -5 score today. A Highsmith, his Satune after his super low round, but even guys like a Harry Hall, Aaron Rye, Paul, and Norlander up there towards the top, I would expect maybe a 20 to 30% difference in their ownership comparatively, right? I'm not talking about, guy going from 2 to 23% or anything like that. I'm talking about if they were let's say 6% owned, they might go from 6 to 8% owned or something like that. So you're talking about, little changes out there with the ownership. But if it's somebody that was already going to be popular, let's say like Harry Hall, who's up there in second, or an Akshay Bhatia, who is just going to generate ownership because he's the most expensive player on the board, then that's where they could get a little bit more steam than some of the guys around them. So, these guys are still in play out there in my player pool. But if there's somebody like Akshay who also gained 2 strokes putting, that might be a fade spot for me because it feels like he's going to come back down to earth with the putter a bit. You could say the same thing about a guy like a Salinda down here. He gained about 2 strokes on approach and also 2 strokes with the putter. The players that could be a little bit sneakier might be players like a Henrik Norlander. And the reason I say that is he's there at T16. He's also a little bit cheaper. Guys like Aaron Rye, Harry Hall towards the top end of the board, there's just no way in hell that they're going to be low owned. You're talking about at least 15 to 20% ownership on those sort of players, if not 30% plus if you're looking at an Akshay Bhatia. So if you're looking to find some of these ball striking poppers, it's a lot of times best done with your cheaper players, and especially with guys that didn't post -5 to -7 rounds. So for example, like a Joe Highsmith with -3, he's still going to get a slight bump in that ownership, but maybe not as much as some of the other guys around him. But like a Chris Gotterup, he really struggled off the tee today. That's not something that's likely to happen again for an elite tier bomber like him. So he could be a little bit of a sneaky spot to go out there and take. And if memory serves me correctly, Gotterup is also a PM wave tee time. So if we're going to see an advantage towards that side of things, that would also be nice to go out there and lock up. But guys like a Ben Martin went out there, gained on approach, but then lost over there with the putter. All players that you might want to give a slight bump out there in your process. But just know, and this is why I gave that disclaimer to start here, that you're not going to be alone with giving these kind of players a bump. In terms of your off the tee, you can see a lot of the same. I would say that these off the tee poppers aren't going to get as much attention as some of the poppers over there with the approach play. So if you can find an elite tier off the tee performance and marry it up with some solid approach play, then I really like how a player would set up. So for example, in Alex Smalley, he gained just over a stroke over there in approach, which was solid, but it's not earth-shattering by any means, but lost nearly 2 strokes out there with the putter. He's a really good play, at least per the stats out there for tomorrow. Now, I'll have to see where he comes in on my projections, ownership, all of that to see if I actually end up getting some exposure. But in theory, we want guys that hit the ball well out there in round number 1 and that have some short game regression coming to them. And the reason why we say that in most cases is your approach play, your off the tee play, your ball striking is a way to combine those two is far more consistent than what you have at the short game categories. And we've been doing these live streams on this channel and all in 2025. And I've shown you guys just countless examples of guys that'll gain 3-4 shots gained putting and then lose 3 or 4 shots gained putting the very next day. And it's like every single live stream that we do, right? Round 2, we can't do that because this is the first stream that I'm doing here on the channel for the week. But you can bet that tomorrow when we come back to these shots gained metrics, that there's going to be somebody that went from either hugely positive out there to hugely negative or vice versa. And I'd say that there's a very good chance that it's not just one player that we have that happen with. So, a Smalley, a potential lower owned play that you could get to, still will have some ownership because he's towards the top end of the board, but maybe a little bit lower owned than he would otherwise would be. A player like Rico Hoey, he's another kind of player that did it that way, gained 1.7 off the tee, 1.3 over there on approach, lost nearly a stroke around the green, and also was into the negative over there with the putter. So just like we were looking at this off the tee and approach stats, we can also try and find some outliers with the short game. So players that lost a whole bunch of strokes around the green or players that we could see regress back to the mean. And I think a McCumber could be a player to keep an eye on there. A Paul Waring, somebody that I'm high on long-term, really good ball striker from the DP World Tour. So I know, really ugly round. In fact, he lost 4 strokes on approach today, but maybe you don't play him because that 4 lost shots gained on approach, but that same principle when it comes to the short game applies. Now, if we can find somebody that gained over there with the ball striking stats, but then lost with the short game, that's where you can really take advantage of it, right? It might not be with somebody that lost 4 strokes on approach, but we can find better examples. And, an example of that might be a Sam Ryder, where he gained off the tee and gained on approach today. A John Pack, I know he didn't do anything crazy, but he's able to go out there and gain on approach and off the tee. Those are the kind of players that you're going to likely see perform better when it comes to around the green. You can say the same thing with the putter as well. So to take a look at the bottom end of that list, you have a Nate Lashley there at 5 shots gained lost. There's next to no chance that's going to happen. And same thing applies, right? Like we don't want guys that, like Ryan Palmer, for example, that lost a stroke off the tee and lost 3 strokes over there in approach. A better stat profile might be a Lipsky that gained nearly 2 strokes over there in approach, but lost about 4 strokes over there with the short game. Another better example might be a Tim Whiting, who gained nearly 2 strokes off the tee, but that lost over 3 strokes of the putter. And then the opposite is true as well. So if you take a look at the top end of the putting list, the top end of the around the green list, these guys are probably going to come back down to earth. So players that gained a bunch of the putter, like a Ryan Fox, he made a bunch of super long putts. And I got to say, as somebody that bet him outright, I got to feel really lucky about how he played today. There is 0 chance that he goes out there and gains 4 strokes putting again. So these kind of guys, you'd expect to maybe not have a horrible day. It's not like they're going to always go out there and lose 3-4 strokes gained putting, but it's very unlikely that they're going to repeat that kind of day. Around the green, same kind of thing. These players that got a little bit lucky here are guys that may want to, downgrade out there in your process. So, for example, like a Brian Campbell, I know he went out there, had -6 rounds up there towards the top, tip of the cap out there to the kid. But, we saw it on approach. I guess we'll give him credit where credit's due, but he gained over 3.5 strokes out there with the short game. That's not going to happen very often out there on the PGA Tour. So that's why we use these shots gained metrics out there to our advantage, because if we go to the top end of the leaderboard, one thing you'll know out there with Showdown guys is that the top end of the board is going to be a lot higher owned than the rest of the board. And that's especially the case out there for round 4 Showdown. When we have placement points in play, we got to be targeting guys starting up there in the top 5, top 10. But in rounds 2 and 3, you don't have that same kind of advantage, right? We don't get any starting points out there based on where they're starting. So, these people up here, they're going to be higher owned because of their form. And I guess the few slapdick casuals that think that there's placement points or something like that in play. But you might want to fade some of these guys up here that did it unsustainably. Like, I know they played well. You like seeing their form out there from round 1, but golf's extremely variant. It's hard to go low 2 days in a row. You hear that all the time from PGA Tour players out there. And unless it was gaining like 3-4 shots gained on approach or with your ball striking, I don't know if I would play any of those guys as chalk. So, like, for example, Harry Hall, Pot Gaiter, like these guys that gained nearly 4 strokes out there ball striking, I could actually see going out there and playing tomorrow, especially in a single entry, a smaller field GPP, where you're not worried about the ownership nearly as much. Like a Salinda, he's a flusher off the tee. Even a Hisatune, who did a really good job with the ball striking. If you're going to go out here and play somebody that's a little bit higher owned, make it that kind of player. Don't make it somebody that gains like 3-4 shots gained over there with the short game category. So that combined with your round 2 historical, the approach series over there on the SHIPIT Nation Stone is how you can go out there and craft a really good player pool for round 2 Showdown. It's not always going to work out, but it's always good to have a process, have something that you're working on, trying to refine over time. And what we just went through was a little bit of a peek behind the veil for my process over there for any given slate. So, if you want to put more emphasis into off the tee than I did, put more emphasis into the putting regression than I did, obviously all of that is something that you guys should tinker with, should experiment with, and find what works best out there in your process. But yeah, that's all I've got over there for the shots gained recap. Let me see if there's any deep dives that we need to do. If not, then we're going to go through some of the other stuff, including contest selection and then also some lineup construction stuff. Bo Hostler, a little deep dive on him, I'm guessing, is what you're looking for. So Bo Hostler had a really rough round, over par the last time that I checked. Had a little bit of a rebound over his last few holes. So good to see for some of the exposure that I had, but he lost about 3 strokes on approach today. So I would say that this is a big red flag when it comes to the stat profile, but, and it's a huge but, it's only an 18-hole sample size. So for as much as we just went through, right, we mentioned the stats can be helpful. You don't always want to overreact to it. And because he's even par and he's surrounded by a lot of players that are under par, they're in the 8 and 9K range, he's going to be low owned. I don't know how low owned. I haven't finalized my projections quite yet. I like to wait till the round's over. We have all the data. We have the leaderboard positioning before I go out there and run my personal projections on my site. But I would say that there's a really good chance that Beau Hossler, he'll be at most about 10% ownership. If not, they're around 7-8% owned over there in GPP. So though it was a huge red flag, the reason I mentioned the low ownership is there's a time and place to say or he could out there on a player and take a chance on somebody that even has a red flag. So I just, want to give you that perspective there, because I'll still play somebody like a Beau Hossler if the ownership's right, and especially if I need that leverage in a lineup. Did we have better players? Not better players in the PM, is I guess what you're trying to say there, Nick. I thought so. So I did notice that, but it wouldn't be an entire stroke difference, right? You had a whole 134 player field, 67 players out there in each wave. You're not going to get that kind of variance over a 67 player sample size. So I did notice that a bit, Nick, but yeah, it wouldn't be an entire stroke. Do I believe that some of the wave advantage was due to the talent disparity? So yeah, same thing as Nick there. No, I don't. Maybe like a 0.1 shot difference, but with 67 players on either side, there's not enough room for that. Like statistically, that's just not possible. Let's go, Luke. Good to be back. Welcome on, Nick. I remember that you had that sweat last weekend. Hoping that all of that went well for you over there on Sunday. Ventura bogey on the last hole. I'm okay with that. He doesn't need to win this event. I took him down there at like $60-some. He might have been lower at 7K range. Give me a top 5 and I'm cool with it, especially because I need somebody else to win the event. I didn't bet his ass to win. There's no way. What's going on, Willman? Ventura bogeys and saves your first round leader bets on Hall and Potgieter. There you go. And yeah, Willman, I know you're down there in my Patreon. Yeah, obviously bet Hall and Potgieter to win. But hey, if you went out there and took them first round leader, even better. I wish I did myself now after hearing that. Thoughts on Stevens? Has a similar profile to Hossler. So let's take a look. So Sam Stevens lost about 3 strokes on approach. Yeah, pretty much same thing, right? Gained over there with the off the tee play. If he's going to be as low owned as what I think he could be, then you could use him in large field GPPs. But what I'll say about this kind of stat profile is if you're playing in cash, don't use somebody that lost 3 strokes on approach. They're just like better players that you could get to. I mean, look at this. This is actually just updated there with his final hole. He lost nearly 5 strokes out there on approach. Like, there's a time and place for it. There's always the or he could aspect out here in Showdown, especially around 2 Showdown after just an 18-hole sample size. An entire event of golf is going to have enough chaos in it. It's even more so the case when we just having a single day of golf to work with. Yeah, same thing as Hossler. I think it's a good point out there with the shots gained profile. Thoughts on Grayson Sig? He did really good on the par 3s today. Couldn't do crap out there on the par 5s. And the stat profile was into the positive out there from T Green, and then he lost about a stroke with the putter. I wouldn't say that the stat profile like screams like super low owned sleeper play, like somebody that you have to get to, but it's solid. You know, he's into the positive in the 3 categories that we care about the most. And if there's one category that you could see a bounce back in, it's the one that he's into the negative. So yeah, I'd put him at like a 7 or an 8 out of 10. I wouldn't put him at like an 8, a 9, or a 10 out of 10 or anything like that, but yeah, he's solid out there in your process. Where do we leave off? Can I check on Thirsty Lawrence? I absolutely can. So Thurston Lawrence is gaining out there around the green and then gaining off the tee, which kind of makes sense for him. He's going to always be a flusher off the tee, but he lost on approach, a little bit of a red flag there, and then lost over there with the putter. So this is the kind of stat profile that really doesn't tell us all that much. I would say that you have things going for him, right? Obviously some putting regression that could be coming his way, but we also would much rather him be hitting the ball better than he was. The other thing to consider here is that he started off 3 over par through his first 6 holes and then rebounded from there on out. So from there on out, he ended up being -3 up until hole number 9 here. I'm not sure how he's looking over there at hole number 9, but that's good momentum. And over there in those first 3 holes, those first 3 bogeys that he had over his first 6 holes, he probably lost a good amount of those shots gained on approach. I'd have to take a look at it hole by hole to really go out there and confirm that. But if he played the kind of solid golf that it looks like out there his last 13 holes or so, then yeah, you could definitely see that momentum popping off out there in round 2. So stat profile is kind of all over the place, but he definitely rebounded throughout the day. You could have used a par. Hate to hear that for you, Michael, but not everyone's going to be happy. That's life for you, dude. Let's go over here through the contest selection. So if you're going through the contest selection, a lot of this kind of depends on, first off, your bankroll and what you're trying to do for tomorrow. But I'm going to point out some of the contests that I think really are the most attractive. So the main one for me is this $250 4max. This could be a little bit rich for some people out there. I know not everyone's entering $1,000 out there per slate. But if you just want to enter like 4 lineups, want to be able to max enter a contest and have maybe not a flat payout structure, but a decent enough payout structure over here in the top 10, this is the kind of GPP that I'd be looking to play in. So there's a good chance that I go out there and max that 4 entry right there. You've got the Sand Trap, the big $25. I've got to say, kind of lacking in size out there for round 2. So that's a little bit disappointing to see. Same thing out there with this Drive the Green. It's about 9,500 entries, which compared to the last few events is actually a little bit smaller, which is a little bit surprising. So I'd be focusing on some of these smaller field GPPs. The issue I have with these is that they're just a little bit too top heavy a lot of times when you don't have a lot of those entries. This time, though, it is only an 8th out there, the first place. So though it is a smaller $5 GPP, the payout structure is a lot better than what I was expecting to see there. So let me actually take a look at the Sand Trap towards the top, which I wish it was bigger. 150K contest is kind of lacking this sort of year. But look at this one, right? It's a 3rd to 1st. So like this one's absolute shit. This is what I thought the big $5 was going to look like, because normally it is like a 3rd to 1st, but they made this $5 one a lot more reasonable than what you see with the $25. So I was thinking about doing the 4 max and that 250, but now after seeing that payout change, there's a chance I want 50 max out there in that $5. And if I don't want 50 max, I'll probably be putting in like 75 lineups if I go out there and enter that kind of GPP. But outside of that, you've got your like $100 single entries. Like this is always a really good option out there if you're looking for just a single entry contest. You've got your, the $5 single entry to enter. There's a lot of options if you're looking for single entry contests, but in terms of GPPs, kind of limited when it comes to Showdown this time of year. But based on what we've seen so far, I think that $5 would be my favorite out of them. Then you also have this $10 18 max, which I mentioned out there a few weeks ago on one of these Showdown live streams. This is also a really good contest to go out there and max enter. It's $180 to go out there and do so. So like, unlike the $1,000 for $250 entry one, like that's, like I said, a little bit much for a lot of people out there. If you want 50 max, enter this one, it's a little bit less than $200, which is probably a lot closer to a lot of people's bankroll and what they're looking to play out their day to day. So if you're looking for like a 20 max, that's like $10 an entry. That'd be a really good way to go. A little bit of something for everyone out there. There's your single entries. There's that one GBP that makes a whole lot of sense. I was kind of bummed out about it, but this $5 kind of saving my interest out there in the GBP format. But in terms of your lineup construction, most of it is going to come down to making sure that we don't have too much chalk in our lineups, which is pretty easy to do if you're not taking guys towards the top end of the board. Showdown, the ownership is always going to congregate up there in that top 20. So guys like an Akshay, right? I haven't ran my projections quite yet, but I can tell you for a fact that guys like Akshay, Steven Yeager there at -6, Harry Hall down here at -7 are going to be your quote-unquote chalk out there for tomorrow. So if up top, we're starting with guys that are maybe a little bit lower owned, that's going to be a real easy way to go out there and get different to the field. Now, as I previously mentioned, I do think that the PM side of things is the side that you'd want to stack if you're going with any. So that's what we're going to do with this lineup. So we're going to take Kurt Kitayama, who's over there on that side of things, as one of our spend ups up top. We're also going to use... Let's see, I'm trying to remember. I know Alex Smalley. He looked really good in the shots gained metrics too. We'll go ahead and play him there at $8,700. Our third man in, we can go with Nicholas Norgard Muller. He's also going to be a PM wave player. And this is the kind of lineup that I'd like to start with up top. You've got 3 guys that kind of struggled out there in round number 1, but that were all chalk at this event for a reason. Kurt Kitayama had the second place finish here a few years ago. Approach stats look really good lately. Alex Smalley, your best form player of anyone in the field. Nicholas Norgard Muller, right? He was one of my outright bets this week. I love the course fit out there at this sort of track. You're getting 3 players that are towards the top of my projections that aren't going to be chalk because of how they played out there today. So if you other players that you could kind of mix in around them, like an Olsen, he is an AM wave player, so maybe not the best to go out there and use. But if we try and find like a CT Pan, I know he's going off a little bit later, a little bit further down the board here towards the middle. You can go with like a Chan Kim, I believe is also going to be a PM wave player. And then your last man in, pick your favorite PM wave guy there, and then round off your lineup. And the reason why we didn't have to fixate on ownership a whole lot here is I wasn't going and taking that chalk towards the top. Like, I don't have an Akshay in here. I don't have guys like a Jaeger or a Harry Hall that are all going to be inflated with the ownership, where I'm having to offset that towards the bottom. And what you also didn't see me doing was going down here and being like, oh, let's play a Fishburne who's like -6 and going to be pretty popular out there for tomorrow. It's not like, oh, let's go to a Ventura who for sure is going to be a little bit chalky, or a Pot Guider who's up there towards the lead. Those sort of players, they're going to be much higher owned than they should be just because of an 18-hole sample size. So, don't fall into that trap. It's hard enough to go out there and have 2 low rounds in a row. You kind of got to reset things after a single round of Showdown, and especially if you're playing in the large field GPPs. And that lineup construction, of course, was more so meant for that big $5 or big $25 GPP. We're trying to beat 7,000 to 10,000 entries like we have out there for tomorrow. And those kind of contests, you've got to go out there and have some leverage to move up those GPPs when you actually hit on a play. And those kind of players that we took were average to below average ownership out there in pretty much every single case. So if any of them go out there and get the job done for us, we're going to be moving up those leaderboards, right? We're going to be moving into that top 10%, top 5%, maybe that top 1% if we're lucky over there in those large field GPPs. And that's how you can have yourself a day over there from the Showdown format. And the reason why I like to embrace that variance isn't just to get different, give myself a chance over there in those GPPs. It's because I know golf is extremely chaotic. And I've already said it a few times in this live stream, but golf is a 4-letter word for a reason. This is the sport that is one of the hardest to predict out there in the world. So if you're using just what we saw today and using it as the gospel out there for Friday, you're asking for a kick in the nuts, as my guy DGen75 would say. Don't get kicked in the nuts. Set yourself up for a little bit of a better situation. You might still get kicked in the nuts. That's golf for you. It's hard to predict, as I just mentioned. But when your guys hit, when you actually are able to get the right set of 4 or 5 players out there in the lineup, you want to be winning in GPP or be close to it. You don't want to be hitting when everyone else is going out there and hitting and then being in like 500th place as opposed to the top 20 out there in the GPP. When your guys hit, you don't want to have the absolute nuts to go out there and win the GPP. So that's why we fixate on that leverage, that ownership so much. And a lot of that talk, a lot of the emphasis on that game theory also kind of depends on the contest that you're entering. If it isn't one of those $25 GPPs, it's of utmost importance, as we just mentioned. But if you're in a CAS entry, that means next to nothing out there for tomorrow. You don't really have to get that differentiation as you're just trying to finish in the top half of the field. So cater that lineup construction based on the kind of contest that you're entering. Let me catch up on any last second questions. If not, we're going to hop on out of here. So I need you guys to smash that like button if you guys haven't already. And best of luck out there with all of your exposure. What do I think the cut line will be? It's tracking for 2-3 under right now. So a lot of that depends on the pin locations, the setup for tomorrow. With a similar weather forecast, let's say the pin locations aren't that much harder or easier than what you had for today. It's probably -3. If it's a little bit more difficult, let's say the pin locations more tucked than what you had for round number 1, there's a chance it's only -2. And the reason I say that is it's already, I believe, at a -2 cut line. I'll have to confirm that real quick. Of course, we were live while they were finishing up some of this play. In fact, they haven't even finished up round 1 quite yet. But yeah, the cut line is already there at -2. So I would say that it's more than likely going to be -3, but anywhere between -2 to -4. If for some reason it plays way harder than what we expect, then maybe it stays at that -2 number. But if it plays easier tomorrow, there's even a chance it goes to -4 out there for a cut line. So it's a volatile one. I'm going to go over here to Data Golf just to double check on that. Yeah, look at that. They've got -3 as the most likely outcome, but look at that. -4 trailing just a little bit behind. So yeah, probably 3 or 4 under par based on what they say right there. That's all I've got over here for the live stream, guys. We do have a last second question I'll go over. Van Rooyen, good course fit, Max. He did not play well today. I will show you some of the shots gained metrics, but it was ugly. So the reasoning for playing an Eric Van Rooyen would be his track record around here. And he did gain on approach, so it wasn't completely lost out there with his round. And -2 is a little bit better than that average. So yeah, I think he sets up well, especially because of that course history. And then the other question was about McCarty. Yes, I did play McCarty this week. He won at one of my comp courses, so of course I did out there in my exposure. So best of luck with all of your lineups out there for tomorrow, guys. Doing the same thing out there for rounds 3 and 4. So make sure you stop on by for that. That's all I've got. Best of luck with everything that you guys go with.